Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Barry Beckham. This MP4 video has been recorded at full HD resolution of 1920 by 1080 pixels. So it should play full screen on Windows PCs, Apple Mac computers, mobile devices and also most modern televisions. Something that I do from time to time is to look back on older images, those I may have shot a number of years ago. I do so because it's quite interesting to do, and at times it fills in a space until we're inspired with some new images we may have shot. I also like to look back because I know my editing skill levels have improved, so sometimes it's possible to do more now than when the image was first shot. And in addition to that, the capabilities of our image editors, they've improved too. And that's especially true, I think, in relation to coping with contrast, either high contrast or, in this case, quite low contrast. My final reason for looking back, and this is probably the most compelling, is that after a time we tend to see our images differently. Creativity can kick in and we then spot potential that we didn't see before. It's one of the reasons we shouldn't be too quick to delete images. And here I think we're looking at a pretty good example of that. The image was shot in July 2013 while I was out with a visitor to Australia from the UK. So, if Rosie Pines happens to watch this video, she may well recall this day. The Sunshine Coast of Australia, but it was very wet and very stormy. And I took a few images of the water on a stainless steel bench. So looking back, almost 4 years after the image was shot, suddenly I look at this image and think, I can do something with that. Now why has it taken 4 years for that thought to spring to mind? Doesn't really matter, but where would we start here? Familiar place. I'm going to go to my lens corrections and remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. I'm then going to go back to my main tab because I think the biggest issue I have here is I've got to punch an awful lot of contrast into this image. So let's have a go at doing that. I can see, looking at the histogram, when I move my cursor to the right, if you look below the histogram you can see the word whites appears in that gap. That's telling me I need to move the white slider below a little bit. Maybe I need to move the blacks too, but my guess is I'm going to need contrast, clarity and maybe even the dehaze as well. In fact, what I may do, I may start with a bit of dehaze, and already you can see we're moving towards what we're looking for. Back to the main tab. Healthy slug of clarity. Drop the blacks down. Bring the whites up a little bit. Now we're beginning to see some sparkle. We don't want to go too far. You can always tick this little box up at the top right so you can see your clipping warning, but you can also do that just by holding the Alt key. So if I was playing around with the white slider here, I can easily see where my limit is, and that looks to be about it. But what I want to do here is try to get even more contrast in here, and certainly it needs darkening a little bit. So maybe I'll hit the contrast too, but now it seems to be making more of this area down here. Now that's very likely my shadow, because this was shot with a wide angle lens, so I must have been pretty close. So I'm going to drop the exposure down. I'm going to get an effect in the water that I particularly like. I think I need a bit more of the whites now, maybe even a little highlights. Whoops, wrong one. Just double click any of these and they'll reset. I was going to move the whites, it's making a little difference. I'm just looking at the histogram as I do this. So there I've got quite a bit of sparkle, and you can see I'm looking at the image and tweaking one way or the other. I may just warm up the temperature as well. Remember, on an overcast day, things tend to look a little blue. Just a little bit, not much. I don't want to go too far and start turning the steel into gold. But certainly, if I double click and reset it, that's very, very cold looking. I'm just going to tweak it a little bit to the right. But I do have this area in the bottom here, which I'd like to do something about. I could open up this image as a smart object, then use my normal technique, make a copy, open up a second version, and adjust this just for this particular section. But I'll do something different here by going to my adjustment brush. Selecting the adjustment brush using the square bracket keys to make it a little larger. I'm going to just click once and the pin will appear. I'm going to right click on the pin and reset all these settings on the right, so I'm starting from a neutral position. What do I want to do here? Well, I'm probably going to want to raise the exposure here, so I'll just guess a little bit here. It's probably more shadow than highlights for obvious reasons, so maybe I'll just tweak that up a little bit too. The flow rate of my tool is nice and low, so I should be able to work in a measured way. So now I'm just going to brush over that area just to lift it a little bit. I don't need to lift it right down to the bottom. I don't have any problem with it going slightly darker down there. It may actually help. But there I think we've got a reasonable adjustment to the image. Looking at it, perhaps we need just a timeout. A timeout is when I like to sit back in my chair, let go of the mouse if you're a mouse user. In my case, put down the Wacom graphics pen and just look at the image before we race ahead and do the next thing. Now I suppose my main thoughts while I've been looking at this is, do I want to try to squeeze even more contrast into this? Because the more I can get it into it without doing any damage, I think the better. So I'm going to look at the contrast here. I've got nothing to lose, have I? I can always go back if it doesn't work. I'm going to push this up quite high, and you can see it does make quite a nice difference. Maybe I get more effect on the right hand side of the image than the left, so I could always pick up a gradient tool here, drag in from the left to the right. It's gone bright here because it's remembered the last settings. So within the bounding box of the tool I've just selected, right click and reset everything. I'm going to touch the V key to get rid of the bounding box there, so I can just drop the exposure down on the left hand side to balance everything up. Now the only thing that's troubling me now, surprisingly enough, I'm going to hit the H key here. The H key takes me back to the normal settings here. It's the equivalent of going up to the top left and touching the hand tool. But to jump back from, say, a graduated filter or the circular filter controls, if you just touch the H key, it acts rather like a shortcut. But what I was about to say is that perhaps the slight warm tone I introduced earlier on is now perhaps a little too much, although we never really know for certain. But we can only follow our instincts, and when I go down a little bit it soon turns blue, so I have to be pretty careful where I'm going to put it. I doubt it's going to be super critical. Okay, I think I'll live with that and see what happens as we go through the rest of the manipulations. So now I can open this up into Photoshop. As soon as my image appears in Photoshop, what I've done is to save it as a Photoshop file, because I've opened up the image as let me open up the layers here. I've opened this up as a smart object. Smart objects mean that at any time in the future, even if I leave my computer now and come back in a day or two, I can open this picture up, double click the thumbnail, go straight back into Camera Raw, and I can make adjustments on top of the ones I previously made, and I'm not losing any quality because I'm always working from that base raw file. So once I've got it saved, I'm pretty confident here that I'm not going to want to go back into Camera Raw, so I'm going to remove the Smart Object status. Go to the right of the thumbnail, right click and choose Rasterize. So now we've got a standard layer. I've got quite a nasty crack through the, or a scratch on the surface of the stainless steel here, and it's quite prominent and eye-catching given that it's in a straight line. So I'd like to do something with that. I don't think I'll do it directly onto the image. I'm going to go down the bottom, create a new blank layer over the top, and I'm going to do all my repairs on this just to use it as a bit of a fail-safe. So to begin the process, I'm going to pick up my spot healing brush. I'm going to make sure that from the top of the screen I've got the little box tick that says sample all layers, and what that is going to allow me to do is to repair or take pixels from the main image, the stainless steel, but paint them onto that new blank layer. So if I find things go badly wrong, I can dump this in the bin and try another tack. I also need to zoom in, and I'm going to use shortcut keys for this because it's useful to do that when we're working with a tool like the healing brushes. So Control Spacebar, you can see the healing brush is just temporarily removed and we've got the zoom tool in its place. So I can zoom in very large. You can see it goes right up to the edge there. Let me start somewhere down here, I think. I'm going to make my brush quite small. I'm just going to try a small area. I'm going to click. I'm going to hold my shift key and I'm going to click down here. Now I think once we zoom out we wouldn't have any problem with that. But what you can do sometimes with the problems we're having here is you can just do small sections, because then if something goes wrong, see we've got the line going through there, but that's not going to be spotted. So you can see I can click, hold the shift key, and I can do all of that repair in a straight line. A couple of other little marks there. Now this should be a lot easier. I can click at the edge, move to the other edge. Whoops, I was a little bit off there. Let's Control Z. I've got a bit of a curve here, so I was a little bit too ambitious trying to do that in one go. I need to go at this in a couple of steps so that I follow the curve a bit more accurately, and then as you can see everything works pretty well. Holding the space bar I can click and drag, move the picture up, take the next stage, just do a little bit at a time just to make sure that I don't do something that's so visible that I want to undo and redo. But so far I think I'm building in confidence a little bit because it seems to be pretty good. And of course the repair we're doing here, because it's mixed in with all of these shapes, that's doing us a lot of good, isn't it? Because it's hiding a lot of the problems we may have if we was trying to do this in a neutral sky or something. Now I think you've probably seen enough of this, so I'm going to continue and just finish this off, and I'll be back when I've completed the whole of that scratch. You will notice there's quite a few other scratches around, but I think we could be there for a year to deal with all of those, and once we zoom out I don't think we're going to have a problem anyway. Now I've completed the work on that scratch, but if you noticed when we was looking at that pool of water there was quite a lot of blemishes there. There's still a few, but there was a lot more. Now if the blemishes in areas like this on a picture like this are annoying you, then spend just a few minutes to fix them, because I'm quite a believer in attention to detail. So we've got all of our repairs on this layer, so if I just turn this off temporarily, you can see the main scratch comes back, but you can see that in about 4 or 5 minutes I cleaned up quite a large area of that large pool of water. So let me hit Control 0 once again, and at some stage of course I would save this, giving it a slightly different name to the previous one, because remember the previous one was saved as a smart object. I would save this as a layered file, but I'm going to shortcut this because it's a video and say that I've already done that. So now I'm happy with the work I've done, so I'm going to flatten the repairs to the stainless steel with the image itself. Now once I got my image to this stage, what I wanted to try to do is to try to bring out a compositionally strong part of the image with a bit of colour. But I started off by trying to find the best place for that by selecting my crop tool, clicking into the picture space, and I formed the view that this shape down here was probably the best positioned, and it was an interesting shape going up at an angle across the strong part of where the horizontal and vertical line cross at the bottom left of the rule of thirds. So that's where I'm going to start, but we're going to add color to a new blank layer. We don't add color directly to the image. So let's add a new blank layer. If we go to the blend modes here and choose color, we're going to just use color on here, and it's going to pick up the shapes on the image below. So I'm going to pick up a color. Let's pick up a nice rich red. Pick up my brush, zoom in, and start doing some painting. We need to be a bit careful with this, but if we go over the edge, it's no real problem, is it? Because all we need to do is to go to get our eraser, and we can just erase it away. But if we just take a bit of care, don't know why I hit that, go back to my brush and we'll just go around the edge. You'll notice it's quite easy when we've got dark edges, but this is all we need to do. And then once we've gone around the edge, we flood in the center. Pretty easy, because when we get to the center, we can make the brush huge, so it doesn't take as long as we first may think. Now what you may have noticed when I first started to spray the color into that shape was I was using an opacity at 100% and a flow at 100%. And when we pick the color from the color picker, we don't have to be overly fussy on what we pick, because once we get the shape done, then we can fine tune it. There's a couple of things we can do. First of all, with the layer selected, we can drop the opacity down. So if we want really subtle, delicate color, because we could choose to maybe color in some of the drips in maybe red, green and blue, maybe in strategic locations, they're all possibilities. But we can adjust the opacity to get the feel that we're looking for in the image. We can also change the color by selecting that layer and bringing up the hue and saturation, Control U. Once that appears, we can just move the hue so we can see how we can scroll through all different colors here to see if something else seems to work better. So if we wanted a mauve, we've still got the opportunity to increase saturation, drop the saturation down. We've got options here as well. But generally speaking, I would use the opacity in my layers, but that's just a personal choice. But if we wanted a yellow color in there you can see we can choose anything we wish, and we can get something which appeals to us. But as I started to do that, I thought, well, why don't I do the entire bands of water? So I thought perhaps I should just pick one strategically slanted piece of stainless steel and colour the whole thing. But of course, creativity is such, you then start to think, well, why don't I do all of them? And in fact, that's even easier to do than what I've just done here, and I think it may have more impact. So I've saved this. I've got this saved as a layered file, but I'm going to drop this in the bin because I'm going to create a new blank layer over the top of my image, and I'm going to add color to each of those bars, and that's going to be pretty quick and easy, because if I pick up my polygonal lasso tool, let me take this bar here as a strategic one. Should I take that one or that one? I'm going to have a quick look at my crop. Now I'm going to use that one there, and I'm going to make that one my red color. So picking up my polygonal lasso tool, because we've got a black area here, as long as I'm in that black area, that's all I need. So I can go up along the top, back down, across, join up. All I've got to do now is flood this with red. Let me go with the boldest red and we'll check that out as well. So I can flood that selection with Alt backspace. Now you can see the problem we have here. We haven't chosen the blend mode yet. So if we go to the normal and drop the panel down and go to color, there we can see the drips. Then we can add the color that we want. Now each of these is done in exactly the same way. So all we would need to do for different colors is to add a new blank layer. Make sure we've got the polygonal lasso. Here we can do exactly the same as what we've just done. And we'll try to use a green here. Let's select color first of all. So there's red. Let me click the color picker. We'll scroll to green. Alt backspace will flood that color. That is a little bit over the top. So I'll just drop that down to a much more delicate color because we really want the red here to be the most dominant. And what we choose for the remainder of the slats of the seat, well, I think that's going to be a personal choice. So there we have the image with most of the bars coloured. I think I'd choose to leave the bottom right and the top left in black and white and just keep our attention focused on the centre. If we save this file as a Photoshop file, we'll retain all of those layers. Good practice to live with this till tomorrow. Take a look at it again. If you then feel you've got the blue here a bit heavy, just identify where it is. Go to your layer, drop down that opacity a little bit, and you can really make just the red color pop. If you wanted to make that a little stronger, then you've got all these opportunities to do so. The choice, I think, here is an individual one. The only thing I probably would do to finish this off is to give it a little bit of a vignette. So maybe I'll select the water stainless steel at the bottom, pick up my lasso tool and maybe draw an irregular shape around the outer edge. I need to inverse that selection because at the moment I've got the inside selected and I need the outside. Control Shift I will do that, or select inverse, there it is. Shift Control I as it's written there. So now we've got just this little edge selected, but we do need it to be very soft, so we can do that with Select and Mask. Usually with a picture of this sort of size, I normally am up to 350 pixels, but it's not critical. We're up here probably closer to 400, that's fine. I'll hit that to just create a selection. Hit Control H to hide the selection. Now I can just bring up my levels, which is one of my favorites for this. So Image, Adjustment, Levels. Control L is the shortcut. Now I'm just going to move the center slider, see what I'm doing here, just to push our attention into the picture. You can see what I'm doing. When you see it turned on, it looks a little heavy. When you see it turned off though, now it looks a little weak. So again, a little bit of personal taste here, but I think the subject would demand a little bit of a heavier approach. So saving this as a Photoshop file with all of those layers intact, just in case you change your mind tomorrow, but at some stage of course, we need to flatten the image to finish. Now if you've watched many of my other videos, you may have heard me say that I almost never sharpen images these days, but perhaps I've got one here that's an exception to the rule, and I know many people do like to give a little bit of sharpness. What I'm going to do here is go to my toolbox, double click the zoom to get the image up to 100%. Just want to find a position like that, somewhere I can nicely evaluate what I'm about to do. I'm going to make a copy of my background layer. I can do that very easily with Control J. I'm going to go to my filters menu. I'm going to choose other and high pass. Then I'm looking for a radius, probably, usually I find 10 is about right, but this one's looking a bit heavy as I get up there. So I'm going to drop this to about, let's choose 7 and click OK. What I need to do now is to blend this with this one with overlay. Now let me turn this off and you can see the effect it's had. So we've given this image quite a degree of sharpness. The beauty of doing the work this way is we can reduce the effect of this by once again using the opacity of the layer. But here I'm not sure it needs it, and I think it can live with that extra bit of sharpness. Let me hit Ctrl 0 to fit the image on screen. Once again, I'd save this again as a different version, because quite often when we look at a picture the next day and then realize we've over sharpened it, we do want a route back to where we can undo that problem. But it looks pretty good, but I will save it, but then I'm going to flatten those two layers together and we can just compare it with what we started with. As I often say in these situations, this is not exactly a scrupulously fair test, because we did shoot this image in awful conditions and we also shot it as a raw file. So we did say to the camera, do nothing with this image, leave everything to me. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that we need to do a fair bit of work, but it is going to make a substantial difference, as you can see. Now, we were quite aggressive with those sliders, but given the subject, it can cope with it reasonably well. But then having that little creative idea to add the colour, I think just takes this image to the next level. So I think this is good evidence for looking back on some of our earlier pictures, because when you think about this one, it's been shot for over 4 years now, so it sat in my folders and I've looked at this a number of times over those 4 years, and I've often thought of some things I could do with it, but it wasn't until just a few days ago where the inspiration grabbed me and I actually moved forward and produced something like this. Thank you for watching, and I hope the video was helpful in some way. Don't forget that I do produce a monthly newsletter, and that also contains at least one video on a photographic subject, and we also have a dedicated photo forum at www.beckhamforum.com.au. Why not come along and join us?